Hello, everyone. Welcome into another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is October 11th, a Friday around here, and we have a great show for you today. We are getting ready for a huge weekend in college football, but we got to take one quick second and talk about the future of the sport. A number of different things happened this past week that we're going to have to break down, including that new idea for a Super League, and we'll get you all the details on that. Then we'll get to the players and the coaches under the most pressure in this week. There's a lot of them. I only have 8 for you today, but frankly, I could probably have 20 of the guys on this list, and a lot of them are coaches. A lot of coaches under some big-time spotlights this upcoming weekend. Then we'll get into kind of a Week 7 whip around. We'll get into all the games we haven't had a chance to get to yet. Some under-the-radar games, maybe in the G5 or even in the Power 4, that are definitely worth tuning into at some point on Saturday. Then we'll get to my best bets of the weekend. Had a pretty good week last week, so hoping we can keep that momentum rolling. Have some bets that I feel pretty good about going into a week that don't feel good about a lot, to be totally honest with you. But then we'll tie up the loose ends for this entire weekend. We'll get into the Colby Young incident. I'll speak on that briefly. And then we'll get into a ton of injury reports around the country with all these big games. Want to know who's going to be on the field and who's not. But before we jump in, I want to talk to you guys about the Super Chat, possibly using that to get your question, comment on the screen. We get a ton of questions and comments throughout the show, so best way for you all to get your name to the top of the list, get your name on the screen, get your comment on the screen, we can have a fun back and forth here, is to use that Super Chat feature. Go to the bottom of the Sports Network chat, click on that $, add any question, comment you'd like, and we can have fun back and forth. Definitely want this to be interactive, especially as we gear up for a huge weekend this upcoming weekend. But let's jump into here, because the future of the sport just took a lot of different things kind of coming at it over the last couple of weeks, and frankly, the last week has really been off the charts insane. And a lot of this kind of just came together at the perfect moment, but let's get into this really quickly. And first, let's talk about National Signing Day. It sounds like National Signing Day will effectively be done away with, and it's not necessarily that the entire day will not exist anymore and we won't be able to see these kids sign that letter of paper, but at the end of the day, it will be a different letter of paper. Going forward, it will likely be something where you sign an NIL deal, you sign a revenue sharing deal, you sign something that has a dollar figure attached to it. So you're going to no longer see those NLIs, or very confusing acronym with NIL, NLI, but National Letter of Intents will no longer be a thing, and frankly, they didn't really mean too much when they were a thing, if I'm being totally honest. They were very, very cool to see all those kids sign their letter of intent and go to the school they want to go to, but the reality was, if they wanted to get out of it, they could get out of it. So maybe it is one of those things that if they sign the piece of paper and they see a little dollar figure on that piece of paper, they think about it just a little bit more, aren't as quick to get out of that NLI that some people are in the past couple of years. So definitely something to watch. It's one of those things that I don't know how much it really changes the recruiting world. I don't know how much it changes the way that people go about business. I do know that's going to be a little bit different. I do know these conversations about revenue sharing, about NIL, about all of these different things will be baked into this conversation, and we'll have to figure out how that kind of works in the recruiting world, because you have to assume there's going to be some pitfalls, but overall, a relatively benign change, at least as far as I'm concerned, and definitely one of those that we'll see what the effects are really in the next couple of years. Then we got a couple of interesting facts about the House settlement. That is Claudia Wilkins right there. She is the person that was overseeing the House versus NCAA settlement, the $2.8 billion that would be paid to former athletes that think they deserve the money, and I totally understand that. And she has officially or preliminarily approved the House settlement, and it sounds like it's going to go into the next stages. Now, there's a lot of things that have to happen over the next little bit, and this is kind of the schedule for that. So December 17th, in about 6 days, or in a while now, I don't know why I said 6 days, in a while now, the decision will be announced. It will be sent out to all of the athletes that it concerns, and they'll be able to start making their claims for how much they feel like they're worth. Those numbers will be all over the place. It will be very, very interesting to see how those are litigated back and forth. And then on January 31st, the claim periods end, so you have the ability to ask for what you're going to ask for, and then at that point, the road ends, the window ends for you to ask for that, and then the NCAA can start separating this money. They can start figuring out where the $2.8 billion is going to go, how much is going to go to individual athletes, how much goes to schools. All of this is very, very convoluted and complicated, but that's when that stuff would start to happen. And then April 7th, we have the final hearing for this case. It will get officially approved. July 1st, it'll go into effect, and April 7th is a very packed day. We do have the basketball title on that day, so it's going to be really interesting to see all of this kind of goes underway over the next little bit. But the reality is, the big step is still probably in front of us, getting all of this in place. And then finally, this is just paying the former athletes. Now we have to put it in place in the current state of college football, get an idea of what revenue sharing is going to look like. And that's when the real stuff happens. That's when the real tough part of what this is going to be comes into play. So we'll obviously see this kind of develop over the next little bit, but as of right now, it's definitely going to be a relatively long road ahead, but obviously that first step is huge for this. But moving back to kind of all the things happening around the sport going forward, one of the bigger ones is Project Rudy, and it's something that has been proposed by a number of former Disney executives, former ESPN executives, people that are in media, people that are in sports in a general sense. They have come together with a private equity firm called Smash Capital to give $9 billion to all of the NIL programs around the country, to give them a little bit more to play around with. When you get into this new world where you have a million different things to think about, you very much have to be able to pay all this stuff at the outset, because the reality is $20 million, $25 million is going to go every single year to the athletes going forward. Not a lot of schools around the country can just fork up $20 million pretty much every year. It's not something that's necessarily very feasible, at least in the short term. So having someone like a private equity firm come in and give $9 billion, spread it out amongst the 70 teams that they're including in their structure, it will be a huge thing for a lot of those teams. That being said, there's a lot of pitfalls that I'm not a fan of. I'll get into those here in a second. But the idea itself, a 70-team structure that is brought to you by Smash Capital. You have $9 billion that would be infused in the short term into college football, and then you would have a media rights deal that would just be off the charts. The 70 schools would be shopped as a single entity to media rights companies. It would be absolutely insane, the amount of return they would get. Frankly, I think the only people that would beat it out, at least in the American sports world, is the NFL. But the reality is we'd still have to get quite a ways down the road. It would eliminate all games between the current group of 5 teams and the FCS teams. Not ideal at all. That's just the reality. Not ideal in any sense of the word, and definitely something that you're going to want to make sure that you, at least in some sense, keep intact. I fully understand that when they get on the field, it's very unlikely that a group of 5 or a FCS team is going to be able to beat a Power 4 team, but the reality is, I do think it's one of those things that makes college sports special, and we'll get into a couple examples here in a second. But the other part of this is the proposal noted that it would be multiple qualifying spots, automatic qualifying spots for the SEC and the Big Ten. Frankly, I don't know if that's going to be enough, and let's get into this real quickly, because this is really, really interesting. There's a number of different things at play here, and when you talk about really anyone coming from an outside source, particularly private equity, coming into college sports, I'm not a big fan. I'll be totally honest, and I don't really have a good reason to be a fan, if I'm being totally honest, because the reality of all of these private equity firms is they're there to turn a profit, and that's more than fine. I fully understand that that's their business. That shouldn't be what college sports is about, and I understand that to a certain extent that is what it's about at this very moment, but the reality is you should be able to take a little bit of a less money to make sure that these kids get the opportunity that they should get. And frankly, if you're cutting 60 some odd teams out of this thing, you're not doing that. You're actively taking opportunities away from a number of kids in a decade's time, when all of these schools, all of these athletic departments look at their books and they say, if we get rid of football, we can keep all of the other sports running. So we're probably going to get rid of football. So that's the reality that you're staring down. It's not something that, if these 63 other teams, 64 other teams break off on their own and they do their own thing, there won't be more funding for them. It won't be more people to be able to get a lot of money. It would just be the media companies totally dry up, because why would you invest in something that's not the top product, not the 70-team Super League? Why would you even entertain the group of 5 in the FCS in that respect, at least to the extent that you are right now? And then at the end of the day, all of those schools, without the media money, they have no shot of staying afloat as an athletic department. There are so many departments across the country. The vast majority of athletic departments across the country lose money every single year. And frankly, if they put this into place, there is very few FCS teams that will be able to stay functioning. There's very few group of 5 teams that will be able to stay functioning. And then the Power 4 will be fine. That's the reality of this situation. But the other part of this is, when you get into these conversations, you have to have a lot of people come together, and a lot of people that, frankly, are a little bit egotistical. They very much want to have the power. They very much want to be the big man on campus. So you got to make sure they all come to the table. You got to make sure they're all on the same page. They all are pulling in the same direction, and that is a nightmare to pull off. But we did get some news over the past couple of days that it sounds like the SEC and the Big Ten are having real conversations about the future of the sport, about where this thing is going to go, and I very much dislike that for very obvious reasons, but the reality is, doesn't sound like they're very much on board for this. And frankly, if they don't have the SEC, if they don't have the Big Ten, this has no future. Period. End of story. If you don't have those two power brokers at your side, you're not going to be able to succeed. Now, it does sound like some media companies are very much into this idea. Of course they are. It's about making money, so at the end of the day, it wouldn't make sense to be into this idea. But the reality is, you don't have the Big Ten, you don't have Tony Petitti, you don't have Greg Sankey, you don't have the SEC, you are not going to be able to succeed in this sport. If you're trying to come in from the outside sources and don't have those two approvals, it's not going to go very far. And then on top of that, even if you do have those two approvals, you got to get everyone else. You got to get all the ACC, all the Big 12, a lot of the Group of Five, frankly, has to be able to at least agree to this in some terms. You know, you have to go a little bit over their head, to be totally fair at the end of the day, but you also have to hear from them. At some point, you are going to have to hear from all of the university presidents, all of the athletic department ADs, all of the different people that are going to be affected by this, all of the players. You are going to hear from those people, and at some point, they're going to have to handle that, and frankly, I think it's going to be really hard to. Now, the reality is, this is the best proposal that I've seen yet. This is the best proposal in terms of, catering to the big guys and, getting a lot of people in on the party. It's still a little bit short-sighted to the small guys, and the fact that it's called Project Rudy makes me furious to my core. But the reality is, it is one of those things that you have the ability to now kind of, I suppose, get off the mat and start really having conversations about this. And frankly, it sounds like we're getting closer and closer to this being somewhat of a reality. I don't know if it takes this shape. I don't know if there's 70 teams included. I don't know if it's just the SEC and the Big Ten breaking off. What that looks like is still very, very much up in the air. But the reality is, I think we're getting there at some point. I think we're getting to a reality where we have a Super League. We have the SEC and the Big Ten. We have whoever it is, however many teams that is, whatever entity that is, whatever form that takes. I do think we're getting to a part where the sport kind of breaks in two, or maybe breaks into multiple different pieces, and then you have to figure out where you stand. And frankly, I don't know how terrible that is. I don't know if that's going to totally bury the sport and totally take everything that's special away from it. I almost know for a fact that if we do that and a lot of these schools have to pay out of their pocket to keep football afloat, they just won't be able to do that. And that's the big time worry that I have. It's not necessarily about the health of the sport, because I've said this time and again. If the sport has the stuff that happens in that stadium on Saturdays, we are going to be more than fine. If we have those moments, Vandy beating Alabama, if we have those moments of Arkansas beating Tennessee, if we have those, we are more than fine as a sport. The issue is, not all of these players are going to be fine if this gets put into place, and that's the big time worry for me. Is you have a lot of kids that are playing at JMU, that are playing at Charlotte, that are playing at Kennesaw State, and they're going to get railroaded in this process, and no one in that room is talking about them even a little bit. So that's the worry that I have. The future of the sport, I don't want to say is set in stone. There's still so many things that have to be, figured out, but the reality is I think we're heading towards something of a Super League. How we get there, what that looks like, will obviously dictate my opinion on it, but it's going to be interesting. No two ways about that. It sounds like we're getting closer and closer to a real idea that could make sense, because this is a little bit closer than the last one. But the reality is I still think we're a ways away from that, but it could all happen very quickly if the finances make sense, obviously. So it'll be interesting to watch that, but let's take our first break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the players and the coaches under the most pressure. I have 8 for you. Frankly, I could have about 25 for you, and a lot of them would be coaches. But we'll break it all down right after this, so stick with us.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about that Project Rudy that has been going through the college football world. Sounds like it hit a little bit of a snag yesterday with the SEC and the Big Ten just not being all that much in favor of it. Obviously, we will keep you updated on all of the happenings around that. Could change in a hurry, obviously, if the finances make sense, but as of right now, it seems like that's a little bit dormant. But let's get into the players and the coaches under the biggest spotlight in this upcoming weekend because there's a whole lot of them. Frankly, I could have had probably 20 people on this list. I only have 8 for you, but I thought about 10 more when I was getting ready for this morning. But let's get into this real quickly. And I think when you talk about pressure this upcoming weekend, you got to start with Ryan Day. This is a huge spot for him. This is the spot where he becomes a quote-unquote different coach. Obviously, he's not going to change on Saturday. He's not going to become someone that he wasn't before. But the reality is, he is under a ton of pressure. This is the game that he has to win. And frankly, it's a weird kind of situation around Ohio State right now because coming into the season, it was all about that game in the last weekend of the season. It was all about Michigan. It was all about beating that team that had beat you 3 years in a row and kind of railroaded you a couple of years in a row before last year. And then Michigan kind of fell off. They haven't played very good football. They're not a team that, frankly, if you look at it, at least on paper, obviously a rivalry game, plenty of things can happen in that one, but on paper, Ohio State should beat Michigan by about 21 points. They should do it to Michigan what Texas did and then some. So it's definitely something that a little juice has been taken away from that one, which means a little bit more juice has been put into this one, has been put into the Penn State one. He's got to win. I want to say both of those games. Maybe one of them will do the trick for Ohio State fans, but they're a very fickle bunch. We'll see what happens up there. But the reality is, he knows that. He fully understands that this is the moment. He fully understands that this is the time when he has to prove to a lot of Ohio State faithful that he is the guy they want going forward. And frankly, I think he will prove that. I think he's a remarkable head coach, one of the best in the entire country. But the reality is, when you're at Ohio State, being one of the best is not enough. You got to be the best. You got to be competing for national championships. And as of right now, or at least over the last couple of years, he has not done that. This would be the point where he could kind of flip that switch, get a big-time win on the road, and then just kind of roll through the rest of their schedule, be the team that we expect Ohio State to be coming into the season at least. And then staying out on the West Coast and in the Big Ten, James Franklin has a huge point this upcoming weekend, kind of for the same reason that Ryan Day does. But frankly, James Franklin doesn't get nearly as far as Ryan Day does, at least in a normal year. But the reality is, pressure in big games is not a new thing for James Franklin. He's fully understood, at least for the last 5-6 years, that he has to win these games more consistently. He has to beat Ohio State. He has to beat Michigan. He has to beat USC. He has to beat Oregon. And he doesn't play Oregon or Michigan this year. So he's got to beat USC. He's got to beat Ohio State, or at least compete with Ohio State. I don't know if he has to win that game. I do know he has to win this one. If he loses this one to a coach in Lincoln Riley that is a little bit all over the place right now in his decision making, and then a team that shows you what has shown you what they are. They are a team that can get run on. They are a team that if you wear them down, you should win the game. If Penn State does really anything less, I think fans are going to be very, very upset. So obviously the Ohio State game is the biggest one on the schedule. No two ways about that. But the reality is, Penn State can't go into that Ohio State game feeling confident really at all if they don't get this one done. If they don't walk in there undefeated and feeling like they're a team that can compete with this team. And frankly, if they get in there undefeated and Texas loses to Oklahoma or Georgia the next couple of weeks, that's a 1-2 matchup possibly in Happy Valley, which would be downright special. But he's got to get through this weekend to get there first, of course. And then we got Quinn Ewers. He is coming back from an injury, it seems, in the Red River rivalry, and it's going to be fascinating to watch what this kid does, because the last time he played this team, he got eaten, frankly. He just got eaten for dinner. It was not necessarily something that he came out of the gates ripping by any means. Brent Venables had him in the palm of his hand for the vast majority of the first half of this game. And then he kind of turned it on. He played really good football towards the back half of this game. Obviously, Dylan Gabriel making those plays down the stretch was the difference, but the reality is, he's coming off an injury which already adds pressure. He's playing one of the best defenses in the entire country with one of the best defensive play callers in the entire country. He has to be on point. There's no two ways about that. He can't come out a little bit shaky because OU will take a pick to the house and then this entire game will change. But I do think this will be a little bit less on Quinn Ewers in this game. I do think they're going to try to run the ball, play quick passes, not necessarily stretch him out too much. Doesn't change he has to execute at a ridiculously high level because this guy's on the other sideline. He's an absolute nightmare to deal with. And frankly, he's a nightmare to deal with, but so is the offense that he's going to have to face. Oklahoma scored 34 points in this game last year. I'd be shocked if they got to that number this year, or really anywhere close. I'd be shocked if they got anywhere past 24 in this game. So the defense has to win it for them. No two ways about that. Frankly, the defense probably going to have to win pretty much every game going forward for Oklahoma. But the reality is, this needs to be his masterpiece. This needs to be the game that he looks back on and says, if you want to know who I am as a coach, go to that game. We were entirely outmatched. We were playing a team that has the advantage in pretty much every position on the field. We were without, 5 wide receivers. We had just switched to quarterback a couple of weeks before, and my defense stonewalled one of the best offenses in the country. That's the goal of what he's trying to do. Quinn Ewers is playing some of the best football he's played in his entire life. He's incredibly hard to stop, and Wink Martindale showed you that. But the reality is, if anyone can do it, Brent Venables can, and he pretty much has to on Saturday. And then we'll talk about the guy that led him to a win in that game last year, and he now finds his way up to Oregon and plays in a huge one again this weekend. But Dillon Gabriel is in a huge spot. And frankly, when you talk about this Oregon team, there's a lot of things to like. They're so talented. They have so many things going for them. They do a really good job on defense pretty much top to bottom. They need this guy to make plays. He needs to be the guy that they brought him in for, and they brought him in to win this game, to win the Michigan game, to give them a shot to play in the national title. And this is where it starts. He has played okay football. He hasn't necessarily been the guy that you expected him to be. He's been a lot of, dumping the ball off, a lot of short routes, a lot of kind of what Bo Nix did, but doesn't necessarily have the depth doesn't have the deep shot threat that Bo Nix did have. So he's going to have to make throws in the teeth of his defense. It's going to be a nightmare to deal with, but the reality is that's why you brought him here. That's why he's here. That's why he's the starting quarterback for Oregon. And frankly, if he doesn't pull this off, there's going to be a lot of angry fans on Saturday. But on top of all of that, on top of the energy in this game, the defense that he's facing, the guy that he needs to be in this game, there's going to be about 50 NFL scouts in the crowd. And this is not a guy that's very, very high on those draft boards right now. He dices up Ohio State. He will shoot up those boards in a hurry. So a lot riding on this game. I think this is kind of the moment where a lot could change for Dillon Gabriel, not only this year, but possibly in his future. And then we got Will Howard. Exact ditto here. This is why you go get Will Howard. You knew you had this game on the horizon. You knew you had to play a little bit tougher. You knew you had to have a quarterback that was going to be a running threat. This is the moment where all of that is proven. This is the moment where he shows one way or the other if he was the big-time upgrade from Kyle McCord that I tend to believe he is, and I think a lot of people up there in Columbus think he is. But this will be the toughest environment that he has ever played in. He has played in a number of really, really good ones. Stillwater, he's played in the Big 12 Championship, he's been to Texas, he's played in a lot of really good environments. This place is going to be different in every sense of the word. There are only 60,000 people in that stadium. You would not know it by how loud that place gets. They are right on top of you. They are going to be all over this kid from the second he steps on the field to the second he steps off. That's just the reality of this game. He needs to be as level-headed as you possibly could be. And frankly, this is probably why they got him. I think the running ability is incredible, and he adds something else to that offense, and that's absolutely awesome. Kyle McCord just looked a little bit scared in these moments. Now, I think if you put him on that field on Saturday, he would not be scared of that moment because he looks as confident as he possibly could be right now. But at the end of the day, you went and got Will Howard because he started for 4 years. Because he's been in these moments, not necessarily as aggressive as this one, but he's been in these big-time moments, and he should be able to keep a level head. But he's got to on Saturday. If they don't have him playing pretty much elite football, they're going to have a really tough time moving the ball, and then their defense is just going to have to outright win it for them. And that's not the way Ohio State wants to go about business this year. I can promise you that. But moving over to the other big-time game of this weekend, LSU Ole Miss, Blake Baker. We talked about those quarterbacks being the reason that you bring them in. This is why they brought Blake Baker in. Ole Miss put up 55 on this team last year. It was an absolute drubbing. Or not a drubbing, actually. It was 55-50, which was very, very familiar for a lot of LSU fans at that point in the season. But the reality is, he's got his hands full. Lane Kiffin is going to do a ton with this offense. I think he's going to unlock a couple of things that he hasn't quite yet in the season. I think Jackson Dart is one of the most confident and comfortable quarterbacks in his system in the entire country. Blake Baker's got to do really, really good things in this game. And frankly, it's not going to be easy because the reality is you're not doing a great job on the back end, so you want to put a little bit more credence back there. But also, he's a very aggressive play caller. He very much likes to blitz the passer. He very much likes to get after this guy, so he's going to have to find them in between. And frankly, if Ole Miss doesn't have Trey Harris, that becomes a little bit easier. I'll be totally honest with you. But the reality is he's going to have to cause a lot of problems. If he cannot get to Jackson Dart on Saturday, he's going to tear you to pieces. And frankly, even if you do, he might tear you to pieces. But the reality is Blake Baker has to be huge in this game. And if he can win it for him, then I promise you that $2.5 million that they're paying him would feel like a bargain. But finally, Deion Sanders. This is a huge moment for him. I talked about it yesterday, but this is the biggest game in Deion's time at Colorado. And frankly, If he wins this weekend, next week will be the biggest moment, and so on and so on. But the reality is, this is a huge moment. This is the moment where you have the Kansas State team that came in as the favorite in the conference. You have a Colorado team that's playing really good football right now, but a lot of people still doubt. This would be the point where you plant your flag. This would be the point where you prove that we are a Big 12 contender. Frankly, I tend to believe that they're going to do that on Saturday. And frankly, I think he's one of those guys that he's done a remarkable job this year. Between him and Curt Cignetti, you could pick your coach of the year. I have no problem one way or the other. He's done absolutely incredible things. All that being said, a lot of that momentum was around last year, and it was lost around right now last year. So you're going to have to be very careful. It's a huge game, and frankly could set you off on two very different paths this year. Deion has done an incredible job so far this year, has been one of the very best coaches in the entire country. This is the moment where he really takes that next step, where this team takes that next step, and maybe they move into a Big 12 berth and maybe a CFP berth. Who knows? But the reality is, it all comes down to this weekend. If he can execute, then things get a little bit more interesting up there in Boulder. But a lot of guys, frankly, I could go on for days about the number of players, coaches, a lot of coaches that have a ton of pressure on them this upcoming weekend. Kalen DeBoer, another one, obviously, going on the road to South Carolina after a just inexplicable loss to Vanderbilt. You have to be able to execute and do it at a very high level. I hope he wears a t-shirt again. I'll be totally honest with you guys. But at the end of the day, I hope the result on the field is better, and he has a lot on his shoulders going into that game. So that'll be interesting to watch, as well as probably a million other people. But the reality is, only had to keep it to 8 there. But let's take our second break here. And when we come back, we're just going to update you on all of the games that are a little bit under the radar. Some G5 games, some Power 4 games that maybe you're just not thinking about right now, but could have an impact on how crazy this upcoming weekend is. So we'll talk about it right after this, so stick with us.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about all of the people that are under huge amounts of pressure going into a massive week in week 7, and definitely there are a lot more than I picked, but I'm sure you can find the people that I'm talking about in that respect. But let's get into a little bit of a Week 7 whip around, get to all the games that are a little bit more under the radar, a little bit more off the beaten path, but really interesting ones and could have a ton to do with what the CFP is down the road. But let's get into this real quickly, and we'll start with that game that happened yesterday. Coastal Carolina got taken to the woodshed in this one. James Madison controlled this one from the absolute jump, obviously covered the spread of 6.5 by a ton, and frankly, they dominated every aspect of this game. Went 199 through the air, 222 on the ground, were better on third down, only gave up 79 yards rushing to Coastal Carolina. They were incredible, and it's exactly what you wanted to see if you're a JMU fan, because last week was weird. This offense didn't really get going. The defense was more than fine, to be totally fair, but the offense was not nearly where you expected it to be. But Alonzo Barnett got right back on track. 16 for 28, 199 yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 rushing touchdown. Did have a fumble early on in this game, so want to avoid that going forward. But frankly, if he's only making one mistake and putting up 4 touchdowns a game, I think you're probably okay with that if you're JMU. And the defense really dominated in this one. Ethan Vasco, who's played really good football this year, was averaging around 225 per game, only had 84 in the pass game, had 1 touchdown, 2 picks. So really domination from that unit. And frankly, JMU is going to badly need it going forward if that offense is going to be a little bit more up and down than we expected, at least early on in the season. And then we got Toledo at Buffalo, a huge game in the MAC. There's a number of big-time games in the MAC, and we'll get to a couple a little bit later, but Toledo's favored by 9.5 in this game, and Toledo is very much the team that is looking at the MAC probably with the best odds. I haven't necessarily looked at the odds recently, but I'm sure they're very towards the top. They're a very good team, 4-0 on the 4-1 on the season, playing really, really good football right now. Got that win over Mississippi State, obviously, in Starkville, but Buffalo's played really good football, and Buffalo had the coaching change when Maurice Lindquist went down to Alabama to be the DB coach. Pete Lembo took over, and he's done an incredible job with this team. They are very, very smart. They play with pretty much every team that's in front of them, and they were able to knock off NIU after that big-time win over Notre Dame. They beat them right after a bye. So really, really fun team. Sean Dolock is someone that you're just going to want to watch. He's a linebacker from this Buffalo team. I believe the leading tackler in the country. I'm not exactly sure. I believe he has something like 71 right now. He is absolutely absurd. He's incredible to watch. One of those guys that he's in on pretty much every single play that you'll see. And then Marcus Fuqua, another guy on that back end that I think is just really, really fun to watch. Flies downhill, is so much fun from that safety position. And then on the Toledo side, they're led by Georgia Tech transfer at quarterback Tucker Gleason. Really good player, playing awesome football right now. Buffalo does have CJ Ogbonnaya under center, so very different attacks. It's going to be very rush heavy for Buffalo. It's going to be very pass heavy or not very pass heavy, but a little bit more slanted toward the pass for Toledo. So I would lean Toledo in this one, but I think it's going to be a fight. I think it's going to be a really, really fun one to watch up there in Buffalo, New York, and we'll likely break it down on next week's show. Wisconsin's in a weird place right now. I'm not really sure what that program has going forward because they were able to have a little bit of fun last weekend against Purdue because a lot of people have fun against Purdue, but the reality is you need to be able to show up in this game. Rutgers is a huge, huge test in front of you, and you had a really tough loss to Nebraska this past weekend, or a couple of weekends ago for Rutgers. And without Ches Malusi, who is the guy that's going to be running the football for Wisconsin? Who's the guy that's going to be making those plays? Tawi Walker played really good football against Purdue. He's not going to have nearly as much room against this Rutgers team. It'll be interesting to see how they can handle it. I just think Wisconsin needs one of these wins. They need a win where they go on the road, they're a little bit of an underdog, they get a really gutty win, because I think Luke Fickell's just got to prove to those fans that he has something going forward. He has a little bit of juice going forward, and right now, doesn't seem like they have a lot. I will take Rutgers in this game, but maybe Wisconsin just has that back up against the wall type mentality, and they come out swinging on Saturday. And then we have an interesting one. Purdue against Illinois, going to Illinois. One of those things where Purdue has been the punching bag for this Big Ten for thus far this season, and I expect it to continue throughout the rest of the season. But the reality is Illinois has a ton of momentum. Could this be the point where a lot of this kind of falls apart? Because frankly, I think we're all kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop on a lot of these big-time teams that are either undefeated, have one loss, and are hanging out in the top 25. I think Illinois is a great team. No two ways about that. I frankly think they're going to win this game. The reality is this has kind of been the moment for a lot of Illinois teams where a lot of this kind of comes crashing to the ground. Not necessarily that they've been this good in past years, but the reality is there's been a moment in a couple of these seasons in the past little bit where Illinois has some momentum, they're playing pretty good football, and then they run into a team that they very well should beat, and they just don't. So they're going to have to be able to execute in this day. They should be able to win this game very, very comfortably, but maybe this one sneaks up on them a little bit more than we're thinking right now. Going back to the MAC, a huge game here, and frankly, this might be my two favorite teams to win this conference, particularly Bowling Green, but a really, really fun game here, and if you want to watch really elite players, go to this game. Ontario Brown, the running back for Northern Illinois, is absolutely incredible, pretty much won them that Notre Dame game, to be totally honest. And then Bowling Green, Harold Fannin, in my opinion, is the very best tight end in the entire country. He's absolutely incredible. I expect him to be very, very high in the draft boards coming in the spring, but as of right now, both these teams very badly want to win a title in the MAC, and I'll take Bowling Green here. It's going to be very, very close, a really fun fight, but I'll take Bowling Green. I think they're absolutely elite in every sense of the word, and I think they're probably my favorite in the MAC thus far. Then we got Vanderbilt heading up to Kentucky after that incredible win a week ago. This one's interesting. No two ways about that. You have Kentucky coming off a win over Ole Miss a couple of weeks ago, got a bye last week, and then Vandy. They were the story of college football this past week with a win over Alabama. So it's kind of an interesting spread. No two ways about that. But the reality is, I do think this is a game where you're not going to have the same ability to fully take advantage of this defense the same way you did Alabama's. Just plainly because I think the defensive line is a ton better, at least in the interior. So you're going to have to be able to fight in different ways in this one. I think Brad White's an incredible play caller for Kentucky. Probably is going to be a little bit harder to put him off the spot than it was for Kane Womack. But the reality is, regardless, it's going to be a really, really interesting game. I like Diego Pavia a lot. I think I'm going to pick Kentucky in this game. I think it's going to be a really interesting one to see what Vanderbilt's about. Maybe they show up in a big way. And maybe we're on here on Monday thinking about Vanderbilt as a real team in the SEC. But as of right now, I do think Kentucky gets this one done. I think Brock Vandagriff is slowly finding himself. Not playing elite football by any means, but in that Ole Miss game, made a number of throws that were absolutely huge, including that downfield one to Byron Brown. So, Barian Brown, not Byron Brown. I'm a little mixed up on my teams right now. But the reality is, a huge game for Vanderbilt to keep that momentum going. Kentucky, I tend to like him in this game at home. So it's going to be interesting to watch that one unfold. But in the ACC, we have one that I can't understand this line for the life of me. You're on the road, I understand. You're playing a North Carolina State team that is just all over the place right now, and you're coming off a game where it was really hard to keep them out of the end zone. So I would lean aggressively in Syracuse's direction here. The one thing I did want to touch on is Grayson McCall. Sounds like he is going to be okay. It's probably going to take some time for him to get back up to speed, for him to, feel normal again. It was an absolutely terrifying hit on Saturday. Hope the best for him. Hope he has a speedy recovery, but it sounds like everything that could be going right is going right now, which is absolutely huge. And then the Syracuse team, they have a ton the rest of the way. I think there's a lot on the table for that team. I think they kind of got it back last week when they beat UNLV, and now you got to continue. You got to win those ACC games. You got to give yourself a shot in those big-time games down the road, and they should be able to win this one. I feel pretty confident in that. And then we got to talk about the Ashton Jeanty show. Frankly, this is one of those things that the lines on his yards are getting crazier and crazier by the weekend. I believe it's 183.5 going into this weekend, his over-under on rushing yards. I would take the over. I'll be totally honest with you guys. I think this guy is absolutely incredible. Hawaii is okay against the run, giving up 142 per game, but frankly, I don't know if it all that much matters. If you're playing Ashton Jeanty, you could have as many guys in the box as you possibly wanted. I think he's actually second in the conference. It's a stat I'm going to get wrong, so I won't say it. But the reality is, even when you stock the box, even when you have every single formation you could possibly think of, this guy's going to score the ball. He's absolutely incredible, and frankly, I will peddle the Ashton Jeanty propaganda as long as I possibly need to. This guy's absolutely incredible. Stay up to watch this kid. Frankly, we get to see him and Travis Hunter at the very same time. We get to see the two guys that are by far, in my opinion, the favorites for the Heisman Trophy at the same time, at late at night. It's going to be absolutely incredible, and I think Ashton Jeanty's going to put on an absolute show in this game, if I'm being totally honest. But it's going to be an incredible weekend. I think we put so much energy into the big-time games, and frankly, I'm doing the exact same thing. So I'm not going to shun anyone for doing that, but the reality is a lot of really good games around the country and a lot of games that are going to have a lot to do with what the CFP is going for, what a lot of these conferences are going for. But at the end of the day, I think when you want to look at a conference that's going to take a big-time shake-up this upcoming weekend, probably the MAC. It's going to be really interesting to see what that looks like at the end of the week, and maybe they have a team that can make a CFP run at the end of the week, although don't necessarily see one right about now, but it will be interesting to watch that kind of unfold over this weekend. We're going to take our third break here. When we come back, I'm just going to get to my best bets for the weekend. Had a pretty solid week last week, so we'll see if we can build off that. We'll talk about it right after this.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC. To access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about all of the kind of under-the-radar games that we hadn't had a chance to get to throughout the week. Definitely some really interesting ones that I'm going to be watching very, very closely, especially that Ashton Jeanty game at the very end of the day. But let's get into my best bets for this upcoming weekend. Had a pretty good week last week. Went 5-3. I am fully 500 on the year, 19-2. So hopefully we can get on the right side of things this upcoming weekend and play and get some big-time wins. But it's a tough week to get a beat on. No two ways about that. A lot of really close lines, a lot of games that are almost impossible to really get a beat on, but feel pretty good about the picks that I have. I'm going to take LSU plus the points, and frankly, it could have anything to do with a lot of football reasons. I could tell you about LSU's offense. I could tell you about the ability to attack the back end of Ole Miss's defense. Frankly, you're giving LSU points in Death Valley at night. That's it. LSU giving points in Death Valley at night does not happen. It should not happen. So I'm going to take the points, to be totally honest with you. But Brian Kelly, 20-3 coming off a bye in his career. He's 12-0 in night games at LSU, including that improbable win against Bama in year one. I think they get it done. I think it's going to be an incredible game. This is one of those that it's kind of just a gut pick, no doubt about that. It's one of those games that I just think they're going to be able to get it done. And if they lose that game, I think it's going to be Caden Davis just ripping a game-winning field goal. I think that's the way that Ole Miss is going to be able to get out of this one. Going to be an incredible game. I think LSU comes out on top in it. Then we got Iowa-Washington under 42.5. I picked the under in the Washington-Michigan game last week, and I lost on a Washington field goal at the very end of the game. So a little upsetting, but I'm going to bet against them again. I feel pretty confident that this is going to go under for a reason that really didn't show itself in the Michigan game, kind of to my surprise. That Michigan back end is not quite as good as a lot of people think it is. Will Johnson is the really good player back there. You avoid Will Johnson, you're probably in pretty good shape attacking this back end, and that's exactly what we saw in the Washington-Michigan game. Will Rogers was absolutely incredible, made a number of plays, and it looked like this Michigan defense did not have a lot of counters. I think Iowa will have counters. I think they have incredible guys on that back end. They have about 5 guys that I think are going to play in the NFL at some point, and it's going to be incredible to watch that unfold, but I think it's going to be a slogfest. I think Caleb Johnson, I think Jonah Coleman are likely the two biggest yard getters in this game, and I think it probably ends 20-17. I do have Iowa in it, but man, it's going to be an incredible one, and frankly, it's going to be it's going to be Big Ten football. I'll just leave it at that for the time being. Georgia Tech, I do love -5 at UNC. It might have dropped down to -4, but I'll keep it at -5 for the time being. This is going to be a really interesting game because UNC has a million things to think about. They have so many things behind the scenes. Mac Brown possibly retiring at any point this year, but specifically at the end of the year. A lot of stuff around that program, and frankly, it feels like those fans are a little apathetic. I think they still love their team. I still think they want them to be successful, but I think they see a line like Georgia Tech -5, and they're like, yeah, that makes sense, when it probably should never happen. Let's be totally honest. A Georgia Tech team should never be able to come up to UNC and be almost a touchdown favorite against you. That should never happen, but here we are. And frankly, it's happening because Omarion Hampton's the only person on this offense that should scare anyone for UNC. He's an absolute monster, to be totally fair. He can win this game by himself, but the reality is, Georgia Tech has been pretty good against the run, 21st in the country, giving up a little over 100 yards a game. If they keep Omarion Hampton even a little bit under wraps, I don't see UNC winning this one. So I'm going to lean toward Georgia Tech. I think they got a little bit going over there in Atlanta, and I think they win this one and set themselves up really well for a possible bowl berth going forward. And then we got the Mississippi State-Georgia game. I like Mississippi State to cover this spread for a number of different reasons, but probably the biggest one is I don't think Georgia can start fast. I don't think they have that in their bag. And frankly, I thought they would. I thought they would absolutely have that in their bag. I thought Carson Beck would be able to come out ripping, and frankly, I don't know if Carson Beck is all that big of a problem. I think he has some issues that he has to deal with. No two ways about that. I think the play calling's a little all over the place. It's not quite as bad as people are making it out to be, especially Georgia fans, but the reality is it does need to hit another level, another grade, and they have to be sure that they can worry teams on the defensive side of the ball, because frankly, looking forward to that Texas game, I don't know if they're going to scare Texas defensively much at all. And then the other side of this, I think when you look back at that Mississippi State playing Texas a couple of weeks ago, they had very little interest in winning that game. They were running the ball pretty consistently. They did not really care to push the ball downfield because they pretty much knew that if they pushed the ball downfield, Texas was going to get a couple of picks and make that one look ugly. I tend to believe they're going to do the same thing here. I think they're just going to try to get in there, try to stay as close as possible, not necessarily overdo their bounds, and probably get beat by about 30 points. But at the end of the day, not quite as bad as you expected it to be. At least Vegas expects it to be. So I expect Mississippi State to get not a win by any means, but at least play a little bit closer early on in this game and be able to ride out that 35.5. I also like Florida to cover that 15.5 at Tennessee this upcoming weekend. This one's really interesting because Tennessee's coming off that tough loss. The offense is in a very weird place going forward. You would feel that maybe they would have that little bit of mentality that we're going to go in, we're going to tear this team to pieces, we're going to move forward. I don't know if they have that ability, at least as of right this second. I do think they have Nico Imaliava absolutely has that ability. You can open that up at some point and maybe you can get it going. But frankly, this is going to be a running team. This is going to be a team that leans on Dylan Sampson, that asks him to do a ton in this game. And frankly, I don't know if they're able to create much of a margin in this one. I think the back end of that defense is going to be able to be taken advantage of at least a couple of times in this game. And you let Trey Wilson get loose one time. You let Elijah Badger get loose one time. And this game totally changes. And then Tennessee can't pull away. So when I'm looking at this team right now, Nico has not been good in passes over 10-plus yards, especially against OU and Arkansas. If that continues in this one, which Florida's not nearly the defenses of those two, but they're a really good defense. They're very solid, and they're going to be a lot more than a couple of the other defenses that Tennessee's faced. So it's one of those games that I think is just going to be a little bit gross at times. I think it's going to be a lot of running the ball, a lot of slowing this thing down, and then I think Florida's going to make just those couple of plays. I do have Tennessee winning, but I think it's going to be an interesting fight, and Florida's going to keep it at the very least pretty close in this one. I love this pick. I love Iowa State -3 at West Virginia. I think West Virginia's done a great job over the last couple of weeks. They've played really good football. They found their identity in running the ball. Iowa State is going to be able to stop you. Iowa State is going to be able to stonewall you up front, and maybe they don't even need to stonewall you because, frankly, West Virginia ran for 389 yards last weekend. You hold them to 150 to 200, frankly. I think they might need 250 on the ground to even win this game. They're running the ball 61% of the time. It looks like that's going up as you get further into conference play, and Iowa State's giving up 121 yards per game. They've been really, really solid. I think West Virginia's not going to have enough on the ground. And then on the other side, Iowa State's offense is really fun. You have two really fun players on the outside like Jalen Noel and Jaden Higgins. You have Rocco Becht running this offense very efficiently. Sounds like Abu Sama might be back in this game, which would be absolutely huge for them. But the reality is, I think West Virginia's done a really good job the last couple of weeks. I don't think it remotely continues in this one, if I'm being honest. And then we got Memphis, South Florida, under 60.5. This is the game that has been bounced around every which way from Tuesday. They were going to play tonight. They were going to play tomorrow down there in South Florida, and hoping everything is okay out there. It's been an absolute nightmare. A number of people dealing with things that I can't even fathom, and a lot of people can't even fathom. So if you can give, absolutely do. There's a number of different places you can give to, including in the college football world. I know Josh Pate is releasing his shirt. I know there's a number of different places that are doing really incredible things. So donate where you can. No two ways about that. But getting back to the pick, I actually do think that plays a little bit of a factor here with all of the craziness going on around there, with all of the different things that they're having to worry about other than football. I wouldn't be surprised if this one started a little bit slow offensively. But then you got Byron Brown. It sounds like his status is very much up in the air. He might go, but at the end of the day, it felt like he might have been out for the year before that. So I don't really know what's happening over there. Maybe he's the quarterback. If he's not, I don't like them to even put up 20 points in this game, to even put up 25 points in this game. So it's going to be an absolute fight. And then Memphis has just been all over the place. They played really good football offensively one week, then played really bad the next week. I think South Florida has plenty of dudes on that defensive line to cause them problems, so I will take the under 60.5, I think, with all of the extenuating circumstances around that game, and then the offense is on the field. I very much like this pick. And then I got Stanford plus 23 at Notre Dame. This is a very interesting one because I think Notre Dame's starting to find themselves. I think they're playing really good football. They've been throwing the ball a lot more effectively the last couple of weeks. I think they're doing really, really great things. I also think Ashton Daniels is just that dangerous of a quarterback. I think he has the ability to, whenever he walks into a football game, regardless of who's on the other sideline, he has the ability to cause you problems. So Notre Dame can have the perfect defense call. They can do everything they want to do. The reality is he's going to get loose a couple of times, and he doesn't have to get loose that many times because I don't think Notre Dame's going to put up 45, 50 points in this game. I think they're probably right around 40 or right around 35, and then Stanford's just got to score 2 touchdowns. So I very much like Stanford in this one. I think it's a little bit of a fight. I think Notre Dame's going to probably run the ball to victory. Just say, we can take what we're given. We can run the ball down their throat and walk out with a 20-point win. So I don't think Stanford's going to be all that close in this game, but I do think they cover that 23.5 or that 23. I just think it's a little too aggressive. But it's going to be an incredible week. It's one of those weeks that it's kind of hard to get a good bet in. It's kind of hard to feel really confident in the bet because so many close lines, so many games that could go either direction, but I feel pretty good. Avoided that Oregon-Ohio State game, went to that LSU-Ole Miss game, which made me feel a little bit nervous, but at the end of the day, I do like LSU there. I do think they cover that spread, but let's take our last break here, and when we come back, we're going to do a little bit of just tying up loose ends for this upcoming weekend. We'll talk about the Colby Young incident very briefly. We'll talk about the transfer portal moving, and then we'll get into injury reports, which are plentiful around the country. So we'll break it all down right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about all of the bets that I like this upcoming weekend. It was a tough group to put together. I'll be totally honest with you with how crazy I think this weekend could be, but let's get into the final bit of this and let's wrap up just all the things we got to talk about before we get into this upcoming weekend, because there's a couple of things I want to get off my chest real quick. And we'll talk about Colby Young real quick here, because Kirby Smart has suspended Colby Young from the team following his arrest on Tuesday morning. He was arrested on misdemeanor charges of battery and assault on an unborn child. Horrible. No two ways about that. And the story is allegedly through police reports that Young's ex-girlfriend came to his apartment and they were having an argument. Colby Young grabbed her by the arm, led her out of the room, closed the door, and continued a conversation he was having on the phone. He then later came out of the room, apparently picked her up by her waist and carried her out of his apartment and locked the door, obviously. So this is a ongoing thing. All of this is alleged. We'll figure out more details around this. He has been suspended from the team. We will figure out what comes forward with this. And this is the 8th arrest of UGA this year. Absolute problem. No two ways about that. And frankly, this is an entirely different situation than the past couple. No two ways about that. Doesn't change that it's a massive, massive problem around the UGA program right now. And the buck stops with this guy. Frankly, I know that Kirby Smart has done a lot of things to try to make sure that these things don't happen at his program. I know that he has withheld NIL payments. I know that he's suspended a number of players, including Colby Young. I know he's kicked players off the team, including Ra Thomas earlier this year. So, the buck stops with him. I'm not, letting Kirby Smart off the hook because this is his program. He talked about it earlier this week. He is responsible for all 130 of those kids, and that is a big responsibility, but the responsibility that he has. No two ways about that. He has done a lot of different things. He has checked a lot of different boxes. No two ways about that. The biggest worry that I have is, where are the teammates in this one? Now, Colby Young made his decision. I'm not necessarily talking about, this is a totally different case than a lot of the cases before, but doesn't change that someone that is affiliated with the Georgia program was in jail this weekend. And that's been a very, very recurring theme. And the biggest question I have is, where are the leaders on this team? At a certain point, where is Carson Beck? Where is Malachi Starks? Where is Smile Mondon? Where is Tate Ratledge? And why are they not saying something? Why is this something that this program is being defined by the things that are happening off the field now? It's no longer about how incredible this program is being built, and Kirby Smart is building another Alabama, and he's going to go on a dynasty run. It's about, why are so many kids being behind bars in this program? And they have to figure it out one way or the other. Now, I'm not going to sit here and act like I have the answer, because frankly, I know that Kirby Smart has done a remarkable amount of things to try to get this to not happen in the future, but it continues to happen, and that's the end-all be-all of this situation. He has to find a solution one way or the other, and we'll figure out if he can. It's going to be really interesting to watch this one unfold. I don't know what the situation around Colby Young will be over the next couple of weeks. He is not playing this Saturday. Maybe he will be with them for the Texas game, depending on how all of this goes, but the reality is Georgia has a spotlight around him that is all too familiar, and it's for all of the wrong reasons. So Kirby Smart's got to figure it out. These players got to figure it out, and it's got to get better. One way or the other, it's got to get better, whether it's, finding better players to come into your program, not necessarily better players, better people to come into your program, because maybe that's the problem. Maybe Kirby's putting a little bit more too much energy into how good of a football player you are instead of how good of a person you are. And I don't think Kirby Smart is intentionally doing that by any means. I do think there's a reality there. There's a reality that could be happening, and he's going to have to look inward to figure that out. So I've talked about this a lot. My opinion has really relatively been unchanged about this UGA situation, but at the end of the day, it keeps happening. It keeps putting a negative spotlight on a program that frankly should have a lot of positive spotlight on it, so they got to figure it out one way or the other, whether that's kicking Colby Young off the team and figuring it out in the offseason or what have you. One way or the other, it's got to be fixed down there in Athens, Georgia, or it's going to come at the expense of this program, probably going to come at the expense of Kirby Smart's career. So a lot of things that have to come into play here, and we'll see if they figure it out over the next little bit. It's been very underwhelming thus far, that's for sure. But let's talk about the transfer portal real quickly. Let's talk about the change to the transfer portal. It does sound like the D1 Council has reduced the number of days that players has to enter the transfer portal in the FBS and the FCS. It is going to go down from 45 to 30. And it does sound like Oh, it does sound like we are going to preserve the spring transfer portal window, which is absolutely huge. I'll talk about that here in a second, but it does sound like there's going to be a 20-day transfer portal window starting on December 9th at the end of the season, and then after spring camp, 16th to the 25th of April, that's going to be another 10-day window. So it'll be really interesting to see how that kind of unfolds. I'm kind of in between on this decision. I very much like shortening the portal, of course. You know, I don't want that to be remotely the biggest story in our sport by any means at any point in the season, frankly. But I will say I would massively prefer this to be after spring. I think so the kids know where they stand, so there's not necessarily this huge opening in the postseason where you have to worry about a million different things other than the football on the field and a lot of different things that come into this play. I think there's a number of different things where one of the biggest examples that we saw this past year was Caden Proctor at Alabama. He left the program after Kalen DeBoer came in, came right back a couple of months later. Maybe that would change kind of the thought process around a lot of those kids. Obviously, the portal would still open for them because of coaching change, but at the end of the day, I think it would encourage some kids to just stick around for a little bit longer, see what it's like throughout spring, and then possibly make your decision after that. So I like that they're shortening it, absolutely, very much like that, but I do think they're going to have to, I would prefer, I suppose, probably the best way to put it, I would prefer them put it at the end of spring and make this a little bit easier on the kids, definitely easier on the coaches, and just make this a little bit more manageable at the end of the day. But a step in the right direction at the end of the day. Some injury reports from around the country. Quinn Ewers will be the starter on Saturday for Texas. He is the QB1. He's the leader of this team. Anyone saying that Arch Manning should be the starter going forward, I frankly just believe you don't know the Texas offense. But at the end of the day, it will be Quinn Ewers under center. He is a huge player for this team and gets them a ton on that offensive side of the ball. And then you also have Derek Williams. He will be back for this game. It sounds like the safety, really talented sophomore safety for them, will be in the lineup. The one worry area for Texas is the punter position. Michael Kern pulled his groin late in that Mississippi State game. Sounds like he probably won't go. He's questionable right now. We'll see what happens there, but definitely will be something to watch and definitely could affect this game. Ian Ratliff, I believe, will be the punter if he's not, so something to keep your eye on. No two ways about that. And then on the OU side, it's not been nearly as nice to them. Deion Burks, their number one wide receiver this year, will not play in this game. Or it seems like he won't play. Maybe something happens before tomorrow that totally changes that. But as of right now, it seems pretty confident that he will not be on the field. That puts them without their top 5 wide receivers in this game. They've been absolutely just snake-bitten on that wide receiver room. It's been an absolute nightmare for them to deal with. J.J. Hester, Brennan Thompson just got a lot more energy. And Brennan Thompson going up against his former team, maybe there's a little bit of juice in those legs. But moving on to Oregon, Ohio State, it does sound like Sione Luala is going to be in this game for Oregon, a huge player on the back end of that defense. Kamari Terrell is also going to be there. It sounds like Gary Bryant is back on the practice field, will be possibly on the field this upcoming weekend. A little bit unlikely, or it remains unlikely, but at the end of the day, one of those things that if he's on the field, he's going to make an effect on this game. And then on the Ohio State side, you got Carnell Tate back for this game. That's all the injury news. So you got to feel really good if you're an Ohio State fan. Nothing really too big to talk about other than it sounds like Carnell Tate will be back and they badly need him in this game. And then moving on to LSU Ole Miss, it sounds like Trey Harris is still questionable. I'd be a little bit surprised if he trotted out there, and if he did, I don't think he's going to be remotely close to 100%, so something to keep an eye on. Princely Umanmielen is questionable in this game, as is J.J. Pegues. I expect both of them to go, so that'll be interesting to watch. And then Henry Parrish has had a lot of really kind of minor injuries. I think he'll be ready to go. That's a very, very interesting question because at the end of the day, he really affected that South Carolina game. If he's not out there on the field, the Ole Miss has got another hit to their offense. I don't think Trey Harris is going to play. And that is a little bit of a gut reaction, a little bit of knowing the situation. But at the end of the day, I do think he's, regardless if he's on the field or not, that's not going to be 100% of Trey Harris, and that's a huge factor in this game. And then on the other side, it sounds like Kyle Parker is going to be out for this game. A huge, huge hit to this wide receiver group. Sounds like C.J. Daniels and Chris Hilton have questionable tags. So going to be interesting to see what the wide receiver situation is for LSU in this game. And frankly, if they have Aaron Anderson, if they have Kyron Lacey, I feel pretty good about where they are, especially with Mason Taylor. But definitely want as many options as you possibly can get. On the good news, it does sound like Caden Durham. It does sound like JVR Suggs. It does sound like Jalen Lee are all going to go in this game. And they badly need all of those guys, especially the two linemen. But frankly, Caden Durham, I think, could just outright take over this game on Saturday. And then moving on to Penn State USC, Lake McCree is working his way back. He will be back sooner rather than later. Not really sure if that's this upcoming weekend. I'd be a little bit surprised if he was out there this upcoming weekend, but a really, really good player. It's going to be interesting to see how all of that comes underway in the next little bit. It does sound like Eric Gentry he's definitely going to be out for this game. Sounds like he could miss the remainder of the season and utilize his red shirt. So something to watch there, a huge player for that defense. And if he's out the rest of the season, there's a lot of holes in that defense. But then Anthony Lucas is predicted to possibly miss this game. Would be a huge hit to this defense. He left the Minnesota game late in that one. If he's not playing in this one, it's another huge hit to this defense that cannot take him right about now. And then we got a couple of things for Penn State. It does sound like right tackle is going to be on the field. Anthony Dunco, a very, very talented guy and someone that had kind of been all over the place the first couple of weeks, had some injuries, had been on and off the field. He's going to be on the field this Saturday, it seems. And then you got the big one. You got Nicholas Singleton back, and you badly needed him back. He's a huge player for this team. Frankly, I think he could be the star of this game on Saturday. He's absolutely huge, and he's going to get rolling on this Penn State offense. I feel pretty confident in that. And then finally, Cam Rising is going to be on the field. Cam Rising is going to play for this team. He will get the start for Utah against Arizona State tonight. Going to be interesting to see how high of a percentage he is. Is it 80? Is it 90? Is it 100? I would be surprised if it was 100, if I'm being totally honest with you. But at the end of the day, whenever he's on the field, this is a much better team. They have every ability to beat pretty much anyone in the country, and they kind of got to put on a show against Arizona State tonight. I'm a little bit worried about that game. It's one of those games that if Cam Rising is 70%, if he's 80%, maybe they don't have enough juice to get it done in this one. But at the end of the day, when he's on the field, Utah fans feel a lot better. I think this team just in general plays a lot harder because that's the leader of this team. So very badly needed him back, and he's going to go. We'll see. Hopefully he can stay on the field. Hopefully he can get through this game and continue on his run for Utah. But definitely something to watch on this Saturday night. So incredible weekend. I cannot wait for this one. Wanted to make sure you guys had all the injury news as we head into it because it's kind of a minefield out there. We're getting to that part of the season where a lot of guys are kind of finding their way onto and off of the injury report throughout the weekend, but we'll see what happens. We'll see who's on the field. If Trey Harris is not on the field for Ole Miss, a lot changes in a hurry. So definitely something to watch out there, and really all across the country. There's going to be some big-time injuries. That Oregon-Ohio State game is weirdly quiet. Oh, one update from that one. Actually, I almost forgot about it. There was some interesting news around Jordan Birch. There was some news that he was, carted off practice, and then there was news that he was totally fine. Didn't want to touch on it too much here because I didn't want to say one thing or the other, and either of them not be true, but something to watch. No two ways about that. If Jordan Birch cannot go in this game, it's a huge piece, especially stopping that run game for Ohio State. So a huge thing to watch in that game. Definitely one that I would keep my eye out on. Whether he's fine, I don't know. But at the end of the day, if he's on the field, then it's a huge boost. If he's not, then Ohio State's probably going to attack that side pretty consistently in this game. But going to be a crazy weekend. No two ways about that. Some big-time games, no doubt, but some really good under-the-radar games. Some games that you might not be able to fully tune into, but if you rewatch them, I promise you'll have a really good time. Frankly, one thing I'm really looking forward to from this weekend is just getting able to watch Travis Hunter and Ashton Jeanty at the exact same time. Cannot wait for that to get underway, but it's going to be an awesome weekend. Strap in for all of it, but that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference for us. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all the social pages for all the content and updates you could possibly need. Enjoy this Saturday. It's as good as it possibly gets in college football, so strap in, enjoy it all. Thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys on Monday to break it all down.
Mm-hmm.